Are you questioning your reality? Do you feel gaslighted? It's not you. It's the media. I am Suchitra and I'll be joined by Bhakti and Madhuri to eviscerate the propaganda, set the record straight, and offer much needed moral clarity. Tune in each week. It's not you, it's the media, a podcast by the Polis Project. This episode, we're going to discuss how the media is Islamophobic. And the reason why we're discussing this, while Islamophobia has been in circulation for over at least 20 years now since I was young, the fact that in the last year, with what's happening in Palestine, with the ongoing genocide, Islamophobia itself has taken such an ugly rabbit turn. And this episode, what we're really going to do is three things. One, break down what Islamophobia is. Everybody uses the word, but what does it mean? What is the etymology, the history behind it, the definition behind it, how different people use it? And we ask the question if this definition even does any justice to what happens to the way in which Muslim communities across the world, especially Arab communities, even when they're not Muslim, how this affects Sikhs, South Asians, others, across various marginalized communities. And then we are going to look at two different ways in which the media really hones in on this narrative of Islamophobia. One is how they depict terrorism, and the other, of course, is the role of Muslim women. Muslim women are often used in many, many ways to both justify war, justify invasion, but also in ways to not only steal their agency, but also ways in which they depict men, the ways in which communities are consistently stigmatized, criminalized. So let's kind of start with the definition of Islamophobia.
I think our episodes tend to focus on how the media depicts various things and how the media creates these problems, creates new frameworks. I don't mind if we sort of change hats to be a little bit more teachery and to just kind of engage with what is Islamophobia. My biggest issue with Islamophobia is half the time people don't even know how to detect it. In Western society, we have reached a point where we are able to kind of identify what is anti-blackness. We're kind of able to identify, for example, what is sexism or what is patriarchy or something like that. But we have no idea what counts as Islamophobic, right? I'm okay with the term. I do think that it masks a certain perniciousness. Islamophobia is so rampant, it's so everywhere. And Suchitra, it's very kind of you to talk about Islamophobia of the past 20 years, but we're talking about like 200 centuries or something of Islamophobia, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the one weird thing where when people want to talk about Islam, they're immediately like, the Crusades! And it's there's sort of a faux theological, intellectual hat that people put on when they want to discuss Islamophobia. What is Islamophobia? It's quite simply an absolute negative understanding of Muslims. As with any form of racism, any form of prejudice, it has many iterations. There's the pure negativity, that's the first form. Muslims are this way, Muslims are that way, Arabs are this way, Arabs are that way. They have negative characteristics. They are particularly prone to violence is one we will find. They are particularly prone to sexism is another type of negative pernicious stereotype about Muslims. The second one is fetish, and all forms of racism also come with fetish. And the fetish here is with the hijab. The fetish here is with forms of veiling and an obsession with what Muslim women wear. It has reached a point of obsession. The level of writing on it, the cheap ways of thinking about what Muslim women are wearing, it's often negative, but it is very fetishized. And then the third thing I would say is condescension. All racism comes with a form of condescension and saviorism. And no other cause is more popular than saving Muslim women or saving Muslim children from the jaws of their own governments, from the jaws of their own men, and then, of course, from the jaws of Islam itself. It's like, save them, geez. Get them quickly to an H&M, get them to put on some normal clothes, put a cigarette in their hand. This is what we want to do, right? We want to norm-core Muslim women, Muslim people. So this is how Islamophobia functions. And one of the most weird things about Islamophobia is that it often masks as progressive. I think that's where I am. in terms of its biggest issues.
I agree with everything that you said, but I think the one place where we differ is I have a real problem with the term Islamophobia. I mean, I understand that phobia is an irrational fear, but I think that that really papers over the hatred, the continued racism that is perpetuated, that is actualized, and there is a real intent to do it. It is not irrational. It's not an irrational fear. It is a hatred that is stoked very intentionally, time and again, by the media, by any pop culture, whatever it is, right? And so I think that that intentionality is lost. And so for me, I think it is a misnomer because it just doesn't fully capture the extent of dehumanization that is actively perpetuated.
Sure, I'm with you, but where are we then with the term like homophobia? Do you find it also mild?
I think so. I think how we went down the route of like anti-racist. I think that kind of establishes the intent a little bit more. I think I like the term anti-black.
Yeah.
Because it really...
Specific.
It's specific and it's very clear about your intent. You are anti this. And it doesn't matter how you disguise it. It doesn't matter if you're trying to be progressive. It doesn't matter if you're really concerned about the woman under the hijab. You are simply anti-Muslim.
I'm just wondering if we go back to the origins of the term, maybe if that might help shed some light, because it really comes from, I think, the 1910, where you have an Algerian writer writing about Prophet Muhammad, and then he really writes it in French, and Islamophobe, basically the definition back then was to define any sentiment that was anti-Islam. It was really, this was still the Ottoman Empire was there. This was a sentiment that was defined to really capture the Western view, the idea of the West and the rest, Why do they hate us? This is really a word that was coined to really define in 1910 the prevalence of the Western imperial core and its need to destroy the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
This destroy against anything Islam. So in this case, I don't think he was talking just about Islam, the religion. I think you're really talking about the existence of the Ottoman Empire, existence of a civilization that has literature, which then I feel is a lot more expansive definition that really talks about creating a narrative against the cultural, the political, the individual, which then, of course, when translated in English, becomes Islamophobia, which then I feel has mutated. Let's also kind of say that in the years, I remember this because for me, 9/11 is such a powerful moment because I went to college, literally undergrad, 2 weeks after 9/11. And every time Islamophobia was brought up, there was this constant thing about what is this? How do we define this? There were so many conferences across Europe, across the US, where all that people wanted to do was get together and really identify what is this. There were reports after reports after reports. And again, all of this was scholars. But in reality, when all of this was happening, you saw the destruction of Afghanistan, you saw the absolute destruction of Iraq. And what you've really seen is the use of the language of the war on terror that was used not only within the US, but globally it was taken and implemented in India. Just as the Patriot Act was being implemented here, POTA was implemented in India. The Chinese government used it to go against its own Muslim.
Awesome.
Every elected government, state, authoritarian, democratic, otherwise, used the laws. In Pakistan, Asim's work on Bagram detainees looked at how Pakistan picked up its own young Muslim boys and men and shipped them off to Bagram. So what you're really seeing is this history repeating itself, but in quicker and quicker cycles. And I think this is racism. This is an alarming kind of racism that we've justified. A phobia is an irrational fear. This is not an irrational fear. This is fear that is trained. You're taught to fear. You're taught, And
I mean, very simply to intervene in this conversation, like I always think of my coming of age. I was 15 years old when the Babri Masjid Mosque was destroyed. I was 15 years old. I was 100% alert. We talk about news a lot in my family. Of course, the Kashmir headlines were always there, and terrorism was always splashed in some form or the other. And then it was with the Babri Masjid where all around me, I could hear everybody saying, actually, there's a temple underneath, and these people are just the way they are. And I don't know who I was surrounded by or who helped me not fall off the edge of that and by that logic. And that's when I became attuned to the idea that there is a very specific language around the way in which Islam is discussed, and everybody pretends to be a great theologian who will talk about how Hinduism is a peaceful religion, vegetarians, whereas the Muslims, as you know, they eat this and they grow their beards and all this kind of stuff. There are all these like extremely grotesque, animalistic elements attributed to them, and it's spoken about very casually. Family gatherings, newspapers, it's super okay to do that. And I think the reason I became attuned to that is because one of the things that happened is that the Shiv Sena, which was the party at the time in Bombay that had come into power, I know there were reports of them going out with swords, killing Muslims in these slums, setting these slums on fire. I mean, the violence was so close and the violence was so barbaric that it was very clear who the savage was, who the actual violent creature was. So what is interesting is that the war on terror and 9/11 happens, and by then I am also in the US, and it's interesting to kind of come loaded with that, and then there is this kind of dialogue. I don't even know if it's dialogue, but essentially some redefinitions happen, and it also translates into state policies in a way we've not seen before.
And you also have this rhetoric of why do they hate us? They hate us for our freedom.
Yes.
You know, this idea that this is always... Bill Maher, I think, is one of the people who actually used...
Bill Maher's the worst.
Yeah, Bill Maher, I think, was one of the most important figures, at least cultural figures, pop culture figures within the United States, who kind of mainstreamed and justified the kind of violence against Muslims, right? Like, he really went the idea that, oh, they don't like us because they do not like our freedom.
Yeah.
Right? The idea that somehow the West is always the keeper of a certain kind of enlightenment idea of freedom and dignity. But in reality, the idea of terrorism itself comes from state terror. Initially, and I know we said that we would talk about the idea of the two main narrative sites of really entrenching this bigotry and racism is definition of terrorism. And it's really, again, interesting to look at terrorism because initially the word terrorism is used to only describe state terror. The guillotine that happens and the way in which the French state goes after to like crush the rebellion and revolution is how the word terrorism comes. So initially terrorism is a word that describes unabashed state terror. And then it becomes a certain kind of state that employs terror. And today, the way we think of terrorism, of course, is of a non-state actor, of a community. But also I remember this, I think this was 2003, the war in Iraq had already started. I think this was weeks after the million people march in London against the war in Iraq. And I remember seeing CNN and somebody describes Islamabad as a terror hotbed. And then they say Baghdad as a terror hotbed. I'm like, are you telling me that all of Baghdad and all of Islamabad are terror hotbeds? Which is very similar because now that's where this current moment where you're calling an entire city rich in history, of culture, of diverse people living, whether Baghdad, whether Islamabad, and you're calling all of them terror hotbeds, which means that it's no longer one act, it's an entire population. And that's exactly what now we see.
Of course, babies in the NICU in Gaza are already terrorists. Where are we going to go with that?
And then we discussed about the legally killed children. So I also kind of wanted to go back to the idea of terrorism, the way that the word terrorism and the way in which it's associated with was popularized through pop culture.
Yeah.
I know, Bhakti, you have a lot of opinions and feelings, as my students say, feelings about Homeland.
Yeah.
Which was one of those shows that really...
Hey, the first show that I analyzed on, and it got me death threats.
Oh my goodness.
And the biggest criticism when I wrote a kind of critical analysis of the TV show Homeland was, you're taking entertainment too seriously. Lighten up. Everybody's favorite gaslight, right? Lighten up. Come on. It's too much. Okay, well, if it's so light and if it's so chill, why are you all sending me death threats, man? Because I criticized this show.
Correct.
It's absurd. I didn't think that terrorism was a term that emerges out of describing state-sanctioned violence. Of course it is. I know that now. But I always thought that it stood for a sort of alternative form of generating terror among civilian populations rather than military or sanctioned population. But this is interesting.
And traditionally, it is the states that have had monopoly over violence, which meant that state terror is the most omnipresent kind of terror. The David Goliath story David is always the minor character. The number of Davids in history is very limited, right? Like the state is always all-encompassing. Yes, resistance exists, but it's the state terror. When we say today all we have to do is for Harris or Biden to pick up the phone and say halt the shipment and the war in Gaza would end, is because state is the only entity that can enable that scale of mass violence, which means that if the state wants to, the terror can stop.
Absolutely.
The state, it's like a tap water. You can open it up and the state controls how the violence plays out.
Yeah, I think very pernicious is what you were saying earlier, right? Like this entire edifice that has been erected by every single state that we know to go after terror and prosecute terror, when the truth is that most criminal laws have enough, there's enough on the books to go after this. But the creation of this entirely new legal category, terrorists, allowed the state to essentially go after very particular people. So it's all done, like the effort to dehumanize is concerted, right? And deliberate is what I'm trying to say. So you have these laws that are created that are meant to prosecute crimes that are attributed to a very particular sect of people or group of people or non-state resistors or whatever. And then at the same time, you have pop culture working to sort of create this and entrench this idea of, this is going to sound really bad, okay, but the savage du jour is the Muslim, right? From whatever person that they were calling the savage, today it has become the Muslim. So pop culture goes along with the propaganda, and you have Homeland and all these horrible liberal shows.
Endless.
Yeah, I mean, it's really endless, right? And then along with that, you have the media that solidifies this idea that, yes, indeed, they are terrorists. Indeed, they hate us for our freedom. Indeed, their liberation is in our hands and it's actually good for them that we blah, blah, blah. And then, all the other stuff that we talk about with the instrumentalization of women specifically in this. But it is this concerted effort on all fronts to dehumanize a particular group of people in every way possible. I mean, there is nothing redeeming. I think the only redeeming thing you hear about Muslims, right, is, oh, he's not that Muslim, or he's not a practicing Muslim. Or you had, like in Bollywood, like everybody just would have these expectations of several of these main characters, Bollywood actors from Shah Rukh Khan to Salman Khan, to be as non-Muslim as humanly possible, right? Like their religion is just not a part of them. And then they say, oh yeah, you're Indian first.
Yeah.
That's what makes you a palatable Muslim,
Absolutely.
So that is just the most disgusting aspect of it. That it is just...
So remember when Abdul Kalam becomes the president of India? There's a profile that is written about Abdul Kalam in which, he's depicted exactly as this idea of the good Muslim and the bad Muslim. And he's a good Muslim because he plays a Rudravina. He's the good Muslim because he's... Yes.
Because he's not Muslim.
No. If there is a profile of him playing the Rudravina, where he says that he is this because this, and this. Which...
God forbid it's just a Veena, a Rudravina. Wow. So Hindu, so civilized.
And there's really this point where this is the use of language, right? The use of language where even the most liberal presenting people end up becoming vehicles through which this narrative is spread. And there's an essay that Afsa Kanjwal wrote many years ago criticizing Mehdi Hassan when he wrote this essay where he calls the Christian right the Christian Taliban. He calls Trump the Caliph. And Hafsa is like, why are you using this language?
Yeah.
Can't you? Isn't there a better way to criticize and describe what Trump is doing? Isn't there a better way to talk about Christian fundamental terror without drawing in? And again, I know that Mehdi is a liberal darling. I know that he is seen as somebody who is consistently speaking for Palestine. But even when we speak about all of this, end of the day, even the people that we believe are doing the job of humanizing certain groups of people are often the ones also end up repeating the same cycle because the language is so deeply entrenched.
I am going to, our wonderful producer, Devraj, came up with a whole list of articles from mainstream print and digital platforms, okay? And this is like basically the 21st century, 2001 to now. And I'm just going to throw out some titles. Islam is a religion of violence. Ayan Hirsi Ali, Foreign Policy.
Oh my God, she's the worst.
The Difference Between a Killer and a Terrorist by J.M. Berger, The Atlantic. Afghanistan again becomes a cradle for jihadism and Al-Qaeda by Robin Wright, August 23, 2021. Journey to Jihad by Ben Taub. Young Muslims in the West are a ticking time bomb, increasingly sympathizing with radicals. Rahim Kasam. We can unpack a little bit how many Muslims are actually writing Islamophobic stuff, but in a minute. The distortion of Islam that drives terrorism. Washington Post, Robert Rabel. Calling the capital right terrorism will only hurt communities of color. Now, of course, this is sad that this has to be written because this is obviously some sort of a defense of sorts, right? Islamism is the new Bolshevism.
Margaret Thatcher.
Exactly.
Really?
Yes. The contract with Muslims must be torn up. The Guardian. Okay, and then here's another one, Mona Chalabi trying to draw attention to Islamophobia. Terror attacks by Muslims received 357% more press attention. Study finds. I mean, not only do these headlines drive sales and eyeballs to websites, I mean, this is just, it's sort of like it's unclear what came first. It's a chicken and egg kind of thing. But in a way, this has become a self-perpetuating, awful industry where choicier headlines, more sensational headline, it's just the more papers you sell.
Should we also talk about the way in which politicians like Hillary Clinton, Hillary Clinton is maybe just one of the many, who have consistently used the figure of women being saved. Very similar to what's happening in Palestine when they wanted to invade Libya. One of the things that Hillary Clinton repeatedly said, was that, oh, all these men are taking Viagra because they really just want to go rape. Mm-hmm. That was one of the basic justifications used for the invasion of Libya. Hillary Clinton, again, consistently, I think a study found that how she's one of the most consistent purveyors of hate, in which the woman, because she says I think in China she goes to says that the women's rights are human rights.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh my God, that's so amazing. But in reality, centering of the idea that all of these women need to be saved, and who needs to be saved, who is doing the saving, and why American foreign policy is so complicit in creating war with the agenda that they're actually saving these people.
I mean, Leela Abu Lugod's entire book, Do Muslim Women Need Saving, is beautifully illustrated with tons and tons of examples of how the run-up to the war in Afghanistan was another pretext of saving these women from the Taliban. And she has many other kind of elements from popular culture, anthropological studies that just show how extraordinary this is. And I think it's also just as good a time to bring up Edward Said, monumental work, Orientalism. And what is that? I mean, we just kind of can flip that word and say the book is really about Islamophobia. We have 300 centuries of colonialism that have generated this body of knowledge that he calls Orientalism, which is a ubiquitous, non-existent area that is kind of just riddled with stereotypes and negative understandings of the other. The other, in this case, is Muslim. And, all the Edward Said books, the Orientalism, the original cover was, I think it was the painting by Delacroix, where he goes into the harem, and then you have this snake charmer kid and these women in the harem and all this kind of stuff. There's an obsession, this kind of negative, fetishistic, aesthetic obsession with kind of ripping through and generating knowledge about Islam that is actually like completely fabricated.
And this obsession with saving women is framed or is occurs under the guise of secularism, right? Like secularism is presented to be opposite of whatever Islamism or theocracy or whatever is, right? That this is the way of the future, this is progressive, and the hijab ban in France falls squarely within this, and we must not resist this march toward the future. So like initially, like how you said, Suchitra, this parades, or Bhakti, maybe you said it, this desire to save people masquerades as progressivism. And I just want to read from this article, which is 20 years old. It's by Polly Toynbee at The Guardian. And it's titled...
She literally sounds like somebody who fox hunts. I'm sorry.
Well, you'll see. We must be free to criticize without being called racist.
Of course.
And it begins with, what is the rationalist to do? Atheists, feminists, and anti-racists are paralyzed by Islam. Whichever way they turn, they find themselves at risk of alliances with undesirables of every nasty hue. And then she goes on to talk about how a month prior to this article, an organization called the Islamic Human Rights Commission named her the winner of their most Islamophobic media personality. Okay. And she is just so traumatized by this. Okay. And she's like, I got all these emails, da 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 da. And the thing is that to give a flavor of the Islamic Human Rights Commission Awards, Nick Griffin of the BNP won the most Islamophobic British politician award. Jacques Chirac and Ariel Sharon shared the International Islamophobic Politician Award, and Islamophobe of the Year was George Bush. That's the company I found myself in.
Why are we doing stuff like this now? Should we institute an award?
I
Like
know.
for the most? Like, why aren't we doing this
Totally.
now?
But then she says, of course, most Muslims are not extremists. They speak of the peacefulness of their faith, as most religious people do, blah, blah, blah. However, it is bizarre how the leftists espouse the extreme Islamist cause as my enemy's enemy. Muslims are the best America haters around. The hard left relishes terrorism, a fondness for explosion, and the smell of martyrs' blood excites their revolutionary zeal without sharing a jot of their religious belief.
This sounds like every person who trolls me on it.
It's
like
on The
Twitter.
Guardian. And then she talks about everywhere after all of this is basically you just have to be able to critique the hijab and you have to be able to critique terrorism and you have to keep a rational perspective. Yada, 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 yada.
This is in The Guardian?
Yes, 20 years ago.
Well, I mean, thank you for triggering us with all that.
I'm sorry.
And so I'm just going to take a little revenge here and tell you something. A cat may feel the sun on her face. She may chase a squirrel into the park. A bird may sing in Kabul, but a girl may not. And a woman may not in public. This is extraordinary. Meryl Streep takes on the Taliban. And it's like, honey, you took on nothing.
In 2024. So this article
This
from
is
The
last
Guardian was
week or
20 years
something.
ago and this was in 2024.
No movement.
No difference.
Yeah, it's 2024. There is absolutely no movement. And of course, we're seeing what's happening with Palestine. We're seeing the most grotesque forms of violence against Muslims. I mean, to this day, I think it was last year around this time that a 6-year-old kid in Chicago was stabbed multiple times by a man, his landlord, who he saw as a father figure.
And the other Palestinian boys who was attacked.
Oh my goodness, in Vermont. Those 3 kids who were shot at in Vermont, and one of them is paralyzed, right, for life.
Who, I must say, Kamala Harris had the absolute audacity to have a sort of memory Instagram post or something for him. She made it her own and she was like, we remember the stabbing of this boy. We hold your name in our hearts.
And then
Doug
do
and
what?
I.
Still send weapons to Gaza?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And again, her oft-quoted line, which I think you've drawn attention to in the past, that violence has no space in our society.
And then
But
she
it has
goes and
all,
says...
all the Muslims of the world.
It doesn't have space. It just has a galaxy worth of violence here in the United States. No, I mean, I think the women thing is the most perturbing and a sort of side of obsession. And it is kind of relentless. It's absolutely non-stop. I mean, I live in France now and I have always gone back and forth and I have followed their ridiculous debates on secularism, laïcité, as they call them, and Islamophobia. There is just kind of like a spoken thing. It's like totally chill, and they just assume that I'm Muslim. And I still remember trying to put my kid in a little daycare or something, and I told the woman that he doesn't eat meat. And she turned to me and she said, "Oh, est-ce que vous êtes religieuse? Is it because you're religious?" And no, it wasn't actually. It had nothing to do with that. But she was ready because they were trying to make sure that Muslim kids in schools would not have lunches that were alternative to porks. The hijab is banned again and again. As soon as the school year begins, France finds a way to put a ban on the hijab, and it puts the whole country into chaos. They terrorize people with these kinds of laws. Now, during the Olympics just now in France, they had banned athletes without hijab. And this is just so awful because it's their own young girl athletes who couldn't participate in many of the things because so many of them are Afro-Muslims from Senegal and then, of course, from Northern Africa as well. So the veil is one thing, but also this faux progressivism around Islam is always relegated to this. It's the backward religion. We Christians, we manage to be secular. Jews manage to be secular. Hindus, I don't even know, they're smoking a whole other drug ban. That's
We
a
don't
whole
even
other-
want to be secular. We're just like,
It's
this
like,
rocks, this
we're
religion.
it's not a religion, it's a way of life. Have you heard that? Yeah. So Hinduism is in that area, and Muslims are the only ones who don't get to traverse time. They are stuck in some fixed place. History hasn't moved. They won't move with it, and you'll have like 10 random people with barely a university education writing for places like the New York Times or the Atlantic or whatever, pretending to be great theologians, pontificating on Islam and how it's grown and not grown. And it's just, the state of discourse is so low and it's so violent and it's really upsetting.
Talking of secularism, you know how in the United States there's this constant parroting of the idea that there's a separation of church and state.
Yeah. Oh.
You have this in England, you have this in the Europe too, but in reality, this is one of the most Christian nations in the world, where everything from abortion to book burning to what is taught, what cannot be taught, to 13-year-old girls in some states in this country who can actually marry just with the consent of their parents, is one of the most religiously fundamental countries in the world.
And every president that comes on has to always refer to God in their
God
speeches
Save
and
America,
stuff.
right? The idea that you say God Save America.
God Save the King.
Yeah. So the idea that this country is secular is also a myth that is repeated over and over again. One of the other things that I also want to bring up, because we're talking about multiple places that all of us call home, is what India is doing right now. Of course, you talked about Babri Masjid, the destruction of Babri Masjid, but also the ways in which the law and the Supreme Court of India justified the destruction of Babri Masjid. And the Chief Justice of India, Mr. Chandrachud, claims that he had a very difficult moment with a certain decision. He went and he prayed, and God showed him the way. Your oath is to a secular constitution. Why are you going and praying to God? Or why are you performing this? Because you now know that you're in a country that is so religiously bigoted, where a Hindu liberal majority that considers itself liberal will second your idea that you're going to pray, and your legal judicial opinion and judgment as a result of a prayer is now accepted. And yet India still, at least on paper, remains a secular republic.
Absolutely.
So you have this constant narrative. I don't know if it's amnesia, is it like
Erasure,
being like
I think.
erasure, if it is just a Stockholm syndrome, where no, it is Stockholm syndrome.
I know.
Right? Like you're like
Yeah,
like
exactly.
a religion that is so violently casteist and so deeply problematic, and that is true of all of the justices in the United States too, where abortion, where gay rights, where women's rights, everything is predicated by what they think is in the Bible.
And I have to tell you, I also grew up in India always believing, oh, we are so secular. But the definition of secular was very different from the Euro-American version,
yes,
because
right.
the idea of
That's right.
secularism was that everybody is allowed to practice and
Yes.
we are all happy together, but practicing our separate things. We go to our friend's house for Eid and they come over for Christmas, and then somebody goes for whatever festivals. But also films like Amar Akbar Anthony or something like that that are upholding this notion, we are all brothers, but, we're just schooled in different religions. So, of course, I think that particular fabric of thinking is totally gone since I was a kid.
I miss that kind of, I feel
Imagine now we
nostalgic.
miss that. I mean, it's just kind of...
I know, how bizarre, yeah.
I know. It's really bad.
Suchitra, sorry, to go back to your point about the Babri Masjid and the demolition of the mosque. The final sort of moment was the fanfare around the consecration of the Ayodhya Mandir that was rebuilt
Oh my God.
over there, right? Like last year, I mean, I don't even know if it was around last year, this time, maybe a little bit earlier, you had every single Bollywood star go up and sit front and center for the consecration of the Ram Mandir. Ram Mandir, Ram Mandir, Ram Mandir, Ram Mandir. And it was just so disgusting, such a depraved example of the completion of the dehumanization, like we raised your mosque to the ground, we have won the land, we are building a temple on top of it, and everybody is here, Alia Bhatt in a sari, which, depicts some scene from the Ramayana, and everybody's covering it like it's a red carpet event, and there's pictures of Kangana Ranaut. Not a great example, but going and cleaning the temple ahead of the consecration, doing seva, and Jackie Shroff is going, and Juhi Chawla. I mean, it is just disgusting. The cementing of the Islamophobia, the celebration of the Islamophobia, the spectacle typical of the
Yeah, and then to
Islamophobia.
put in a let's not forget to put in a bad word for the Indian Hindu upper caste diaspora lining up on Times Square to watch the thing live,
Yeah.
and then
Oh,
at
God.
Champs Elysees, and then some other tower somewhere in Toronto. I mean, this is just
Oh yeah.
it's
And
it's
everyone was
extraordinary.
told to light a lamp or something at the time of the consecration. And I cannot think of a single person, I think, whose family did not light this lamp. 7 o'clock, Modi was like, you can all be a part of this. And they were. And I think, again, Bollywood stars who didn't go took pictures of their lamps. So it's just this very
And
disgusting.
how did the media report this?
They did not.
Nobody even thought there was anything wrong with this.
I don't think
yeah,
I read it.
Very little, right?
Maybe
There was
Twitter
very
or
little
something.
I mean,
criticism.
the most liberal journalists in India will today tell you that writing about Kashmir is anti-national. I remember when Article 370 was revoked, NDTV did a show, and immediately there was a quote tweet that said, "Oh, we always report in favor of the nation." You're a
Yeah.
reporter. Why are you reporting in favor of what?
Exactly.
Well, at least they're coming clean.
Yeah, so if your country's most liberal journalists will today take offense with any kind of critical reporting of Indian state in, say, in Kashmir or in Punjab, then what do we have? When in reality, when the Delhi pogroms happened and so many young Muslim leaders were picked up and arrested under FAR 21, what does it mean? How were they depicted? How was Umar Khalid depicted? How were all of these people depicted? The language used to say the same thing. It's as if they have, it's like, I don't even know if it's okay for us to say new bottle, old wine. It's like, there has to be a better way of describing this.
I know.
But I also don't want to leave this conversation at the moment where we're only talking about, look, the media is Islamophobic. Yes, we know the media is Islamophobic. And I was just wondering if maybe Bhakti, you've often straddled this place where it's both, you've taught as an academic, you've run a magazine, you are a public intellectual, you're constantly engaging. Are there interventions that we can do now in terms of, yes, now we can see how Islamophobia plays out, but is there a pedagogical role? Is there something that can be done to rethink and, of course, educate?
I mean, in my mind, I'm always trying to have my own curriculum, my own syllabi, always have a chunk of work that either is dealing with Muslim writers, Muslim films, or something or the other. And I used to teach something called gender and globalization. And there are, of course, the things that people know, okay, yeah, this is Islamophobic or whatever. But Tina Fey, for example, had done this movie. And, I've liked Tina Fey. I think she's hilarious. And then she did this movie called Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. And it is so racist. It is so anti-Muslim. It's so gross. And it's all kind of framed as hilarious. So when I'm teaching a course like that, I'm able to unpack scene by scene how that works. And maybe they agree, maybe they don't. But sometimes when there isn't a time to unpack, I know like certain exams and stuff will come back. And if I've asked a question about a certain film that's set in Muslim society, where the characters appear Muslim, the students make up absolute nonsense about the film. They're analyzing the film and say, oh, the protagonist is struggling with the demands of her religion and her society. And it's like, that's not what the film was about, like, ever. So it's an extremely bizarre thing. The other thing, as someone who teaches literature, is to just think that the entire canon in the English language is a Christian canon. I'm writing a book currently on Sudanese writer Leila Abu Leila, and in a way she is quite marginalized because she's an openly Muslim writer and she's a faith-based writer. But when Chimamanda Adichie is going to write books set in Nigeria with all kinds of priests and reckonings in the church and all this kind of stuff, her book is not seen as Christian. Her book is just a book. That's just literature. That's just a novel. But with Leila, it's always like faith-based literature, Muslim literature. So one of the ways is to sort of just constantly identify when the word is emphasized versus when it's totally left out. If something is Muslim, it's just endlessly Muslim. It's Muslim, it's Muslim, it's Islamic. There's a frenzy that comes about in describing that it comes from that space and that religion. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and it's just like so coded into everyone.
Totally.
I don't remember, I think it was you, Bhakti, who was saying that the work is of unlearning all of these.
Yeah.
And I've been really thinking about that. And it feels like it is almost genetically coded into everyone, especially in India. If you grew up in India, I don't actually know any Hindu brought up in so-called, Nehru's India that is not actually Islamophobic, who's had to really sort of reckon with it and go back and unlearn and,
Absolutely.
also fight off those urges and remind yourself, no, that's Islamophobic. It is a daily unlearning, and it is so entrenched and by such a concerted effort by everyone in power that it feels genetically coded.
I know. Look, I mean, the truth is we can have these conversations and we can unpack how the media is Islamophobic, books, films, Hollywood, Bollywood, all those places. But at the end, there's always this sort of question that is thrown at us who critique Islamophobia, right? Or anti-Muslimness, or just like this pernicious racism. It's like, what are you going to do? Taliban is bad, and I agree it is. Or whatever is happening in Iran, okay? It is super problematic regarding women's rights and all those kinds of things. What are you going to do, right? So how do we answer that? That's what people will say. That's what also my students always ask me, right? So what then? What do you want us to do? Okay, we got it. This is racist. This is Islamophobic. But then what should we be doing? I mean, my one answer is, don't do anything.
Yeah.
Why don't you look in your own backyard?
I agree. Just don't do anything. Look, that is the ultimate answer. Look in your own backyard is exactly the answer. But I do think that there is a space for the right people to engage with these types of topics. And the Taliban is not bad because they are Muslim. Okay. And Iran is not bad because it is Muslim. This is the narrative that is problematic. This is the Islamophobic part of the narrative that papers over everything else and inhibits a real discussion. That's what I think I have been meaning when I say the media is Islamophobic. And it is. It inhibits these discussions. It inhibits, and they are not ours to have, perhaps, but there is a space for this discussion to be had outside of this.
Even if we think of Donald Trump and how he's bringing back a sort of Christian fundamentalist right, an evangelical right that he manages to mobilize them, we are still able to engage with Trumpism and that MAGA ideology stuff through a range of different factors, socioeconomic factors, poverty, whatever, all those kinds of things. And we don't just say, oh, it's because of Christianity, right? So I think that's a point really well taken, Madhuri. I absolutely agree with you. It's an essentializing narrative where everything is blamed on it's because of religion. And don't take into consideration also history. Half the time, any country, if it has a colonial history, forget it. Nobody even wants to go there, right?
Yeah, I think the thing that I really like is educate, agitate, organize. I think organize has become incredibly hard, but I think educate is what we can do. And I genuinely believe that the education begins at the backyard.
Absolutely.
I know young people who are decades younger than me that I now encounter as nieces, as nephews, as cousins, as nieces and nephews through marriage, and say the most horrendous things. And when I challenge them, I see a certain shock, because in all of their lives, 20-something lives, nobody's ever challenged them or questioned them, their bigotry. And when that happens in the four corners of your home, I think there's a power to it. But I think more importantly, I think we do have the role to keep talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the time, I don't think people see the immense violence that happens when these depictions are done.
Absolutely.
The immense ways in which, when friends of ours tell us that if you look a certain way, they're friends of mine who started shaving after 9/11. Those are real. And I think we need to keep doing that. Mm-hmm. And a big part of pedagogy is to educate. So when people feel gaslighted by all of this, it's important for us to keep repeating it over and over again, that it's not you and it's the media.